That's the only reason we're jumping, is because it's really repetitive. It's really repetitive, and we're going to read chapter 31, and Job goes through this big discourse, and we're going to kind of just read the highlights real quick, and then we're going to read 31, and we're going to talk about it. Job's is answering Bildad just like he did last time. And he kind of goes through this discourse about how great God is. And then he starts talking about the integrity of the righteousness. And then he starts talking about searching for wisdom, the heritage of oppressors, the price of wisdom, the sources of wisdom, and the former blessings that Job had. And then the former greatness that Job had, and the former status and the former service. And you got to remember that Job was a big time to do. I mean, it don't say how many workers he had, but he probably had over 100 workers with him. He had all those animals that named out in chapter 1. It was just ginormous. And it kind of explained how rich he was. He was the richest man around. So this goes back and Job's contemplating on all this stuff that he had and all this wealth and his status, and everybody looked up to him, and when people had problems they'd come to him, and he makes this cry out to God. And we're going to kind of come pick up towards the end of this thing, and it's named Job's Integrity. And it's also got another title, I missed it. It's Social Concerns. But we're just going to read over it. We're going to kind of pick this apart because this guy is fixing to come in that's going to be a new guy in the next chapter. And this is where we're going to start back off at. We may make another little frog leap because it gets kind of redundant again. But I didn't want to miss out on Elihu. He's a younger man. And, back then, the older men would speak. And the older men are the ones that had wisdom and the knowledge and all this stuff. And if anything ever went down, like if you're going to stone somebody, the older person would go first, and then it would go down to the youngest. So this is why Elihu hadn't said anything yet, and he's waiting. And Job, with all that Job has said in these last 3 or 4 chapters, he goes to this big discourse of the stuff we just talked about. And it kind of stuns the other 3, and they don't say anything. So Elihu speaks up, and we'll get to that next week. We might get to it this week, but it'll probably be next week. But we're going to read this chapter 31, starting with verse 1, and it's just kind of meeting us up to where we're going to get to next week. And Job says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? And he's saying, he's looking back, and he's done said that he's his integrity. He's an integral person. He's upright and just and all this stuff, but he said he made a covenant with his eyes that he's not going to look at a young woman. And I know, being a man, I know women probably ain't got this problem, but if you see a woman and if you're at the beach or something, you can't unsee something once you see it, but you can keep yourself from looking at it again. You know what I mean? I used to not look again, or just out of not wanting to get hit, But now I mean you can't help where your eyes look to initially. What he's saying is he's not made a covenant with his heart. He's not made a covenant with anything else. He's made it with his eyes. And you got 2 eyes and 1 mouth, 2 ears. These are inlets. Your eyes are inlets and your ears are inlets, and you got 1 outlet. Okay, so what you start putting into your eyes is going to affect what goes into your brain. So just like King David, when he seen the woman that was showering in her yard or whatever, and ended up getting with her and killing her husband and all that stuff. You got to be careful what goes into your eyes. And he's saying, I made a covenant with my eyes. I never have. I'm from the beginning. I never did this, is what he's saying. I've never looked at a woman with an intent, and it's kind of insinuating like sexual intent. Verse 2.
Never done it?
Now, yeah, that's what he's saying. He said, I made a covenant with my eyes. This is made, past tense. He's never done any of this stuff. He's just trying to explain to everybody that he's righteous. And he's going to go through all this stuff. And I'm reading this because this is the part that kind of staggers the other three, and Elihu jumps in, and it'll all click together when we get to chapter 32. Verse 2, for what portion of God is there from above, and what inheritance of the Almighty from on high? And that's the question. Is not destruction to the wicked, and the strange punished to the works of iniquity? And he's just pointing out a fact, just saying, hey, I don't deserve the punishment I'm getting because I haven't been doing that. I'm trying to see if I need to read it out of a different translation. 5, we ain't made it that far. Okay, 5. If I have walked with vanity, or if my foot has... You didn't read 4, did you? No, you skipped 4. Oh, I'm sorry. Verse 4, we're backtracking. I'm sorry. Oh, I skipped over it. Doth not he see my ways and count all my steps? And this is a good point to notice. He sees everything that you do. And that's what he's pointing out. He says, God's seen everything that I've done. And he's leading up to this point that he's trying to make. He's saying he's seen everything I've done. And he's counting my footsteps. It means he knows how many steps you've made in your life and where you've been stepping them. 5, if I have walked, and that's in conjunction with the footsteps thing, with vanity or emptiness, or if my foot hath hasted to deceit. He's saying, if I've walked and done anything that was, bad, another translation would be, if I have walked with falsehood, or if my foot has hurried after deceit. It's kind of the same thing. He don't walk. Some people just live life walking, just trying to get where they can get and tricking people and being just evil. He's saying, that's not how I walk. 7. Is that right? No, 6. But let me be weighed in an even balance. What is that saying? That God may know mine integrity. He wants to be judged rightly. And he just said, I've never walked in an unhonest way. I've not walked in evil. I've never looked at anybody in evil content. I just want to be judged with the balance. The scales are not adding up. I'm up here, and I'm being judged for being down here. He's got these bulls all over him. He's dying pretty much. He thinks he's going to die. And he's saying, I'm not being judged fairly, is what he's saying. He wants to be judged for how he's walking.
After all of his friends have put him down and put him down and put him down and put him down, trying to tell him he had to have done all this.
Yep. And that's the way they believed back then. Even Job believed that. And that's why he's having this mental roller coaster of up and down. And a lot of this is, if I have done something, I deserve what I'm getting. But I don't think I've done anything, is kind of what he's going through. Yeah. He's like, I don't recall doing anything, worth this kind of punishment. Yeah. He just wants the scales to be even there. 7, if my step hath turned out of the way, and mine heart walketh after mine eyes, and if any blot hath cleaved to mine hands, then let me sow, and let another eat. What's he saying there? And I stopped right there in verse 8. We got to pick back up in 8. That's my mental note there. What's he saying there? In a different translation, it says, if my step has turned, or have turned from the path, if my heart has been led by my eyes. What path are we supposed to be on? Let's talk about that for a second. a path of righteousness. We're supposed to walk in integrity. We're supposed to lead people to Christ. Even before Christ, this is before Christ, so he had this mental thing going. It ain't like, I think Job understood it's not religion. Religion is like working to get to God, but just Christianity is just saved by grace. You don't have to do works to get to God. And it's like he's saying, I've done all this stuff. I hadn't let my eyes lead my heart, and that's your mind. It's kind of hard to explain. When they say heart, they're talking about mind. You don't look at something and be led astray by wanting an earthly thing or being led by the flesh. He said, I haven't done that. And he says he hadn't defiled his hands. He hadn't done anything to defile his hands. So verse 8 says that, then let me sow and let another eat. He's saying, let everybody else, benefit from what I'm doing. And he says, yea, let my offspring be rooted out, if mine heart have been deceived by a woman, or if I have laid a wait at my neighbor's door. This laying in wait by my neighbor's door is kind of like a, peeping Tom, looking in at your neighbor's stuff, or coveting what your neighbor's got, or trying to get with his wife, or, what he's saying here? He's saying if that's happened,
Want to have something someone else has.
Jealous.
and more along the lines of, more along the lines of wanting to be with his spouse. I think it's more along the lines of what it is. But that's covetousness of anything. That's one of our commandments. Do not covet. Verse 10, then let my wife grind unto another. And this word grind is when you wanted things done in the ancient times. Grinding is like the most terrible job that there was. You'd have to pretty much enslave somebody to make them do it. He's saying, make my wife a slave unto another. If I've done that to somebody, do it to me, is what he's trying to say, and let others bow down upon her. And we kind of know where that's going. That means what it sounds like it means. If I've done that to somebody else, do it back to me. For this is a heinous crime. So he's saying, that's a terrible thing. Yea, it's an iniquity to be punished by judges. And back then, they would actually stone people. And, stoning back then ain't what you think it is. It's, grabbing a big old giant rock and, smashing down on them. It ain't just throwing a rock at them from a distance. You're throwing large rocks straight down. And he's going somewhere with this. 12. In conjunction with all this stuff about, the lust after the eyes, for it is a fire that consumeth to destruction, and would root out all mine increase. I think what he's saying is, everything that he's done in the past, he wouldn't have never had it if he would have been that way. It would have consumed everything that he had in the old days. Let's read it in a different translation, because that may not be what it means. It is a fire that burns to destruction. I would have uprooted my harvest. Maybe that's different. If I did despise, this is 13, the cause of my manservants or my maidservants, when they contended with me, what then shall I do when God raiseth up, and when he visiteth with, shall I answer him? And he's just pointing out he had never done anything to his servants. Remember, I just told you that he had a bunch of servants, people that worked for him. And back then, if you worked for somebody, you was pretty much their slave. He's saying, I've never, done anything bad to them. And he's saying, even if I did, when God comes back, or when I have to meet my Maker, what shall I say to him if I did? And he's trying to jog these three men's memories, or trying to get them going, thinking about, because he's gonna say in a minute, it's gonna make sense where all this is going. He's gonna pretty much say, if I could just talk to God and see him face to face, and if you were actually messing up, you wouldn't want to see God face to face. You know what I mean? And it stuns the other three guys, and this is where Elihu picks in. 15, did not he that made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? And he's, we ought to have that mindset. He had these slaves, and he already had the mindset that they were on the same level he was. They were made in the same way that he was. God made them too. And that's why he never treated them bad. 16, if I have withheld the poor from their desire, or have caused the eyes of the widows to fail. And, that's what it means. It is what it means. He says, I've never, suppressed the poor people. I've never made them more poor than they are. I've always helped the poor people. And he's fixing to say that. He says he ain't never caused the eyes of the widows to fail. And that means he's always looked after the widows. He ain't never just let them just suffer. 17, I have eaten my morsel myself alone, and the fatherless hath not eaten thereof. I may have to go to a different here. And what that basically means, he says, I've never eaten a morsel alone. It means that I've never kept my food to myself. It says my bread to myself. I've shared it with the fatherless is what it means. I have never eaten a morsel of myself alone, and the fatherless have not eaten thereof. He's saying he shared it with the fatherless. That's the orphans, That's the kids that don't have parents. He's took care of them, made sure they have food. 18, for from my youth he has brought up with me as with a father, and I have guided her from my mother's womb. Now, I don't know why the King James is so hard to understand. That basically means he's raised the fatherless people up as a father would, all the way ever since he was a kid. And it also says that he guided the widows. Did he say that in there?
I got it.
Yeah. And he's just explaining how upright of a person that he was. And this, if you've got to explain your whole life to some people to try to get them to quit messing with you, that's just ridiculous. 19, if I have seen any perish with want of clothing, or any poor without coverings, that means clothes or blankets. 20, if his loins have not blessed me, and if he were not warmed with the fleece of my sheep. In other words, if I seen somebody that needed anything, I'd give it to them. You remember that whole parable or that discourse that Jesus went through? He said, when did you, we might have to go back and read it. He says, you've let me starve, and you let me go hungry, and you let me go.
Feedeth me not.
Yes.
I was thirsty, and you giveth me nothing to drink.
Yep.
That one.
Yep. And he said he was in jail, and you didn't come to visit me. And then they said, well, what, you've been right here with us. We hadn't done that to you. And he goes, well, you've done it to the least. You've done it to me.
That's right.
So Job already had this concept in his mind. And this is thousands of years before Jesus. This is the man to be walking after, you know. You'd want to walk after him. You'd want to be like him.
Well, you know that verse, I mean, does any of us know the verse in the, I don't know where it's at really at this moment, but, where it says that we have to suffer for our loved ones, meaning that we don't work hard enough on them to get them in the house of the Lord, for the Lord to do the rest. So when they do something wrong, God gets us for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's broken
Yeah,
down
for the-
what that means.
Yeah, for the
For-
what you
we
understand,
have to
yeah.
pay the Christians, the
We'll have to
saved,
find it and read it.
the just. Yeah.
We'll have to
I'll
find it.
I
We'll
mean,
have to find it and read it and go over it. Ow. Okay, so he's just saying, you know, I've took care of folks. If I see a need, I'll help folks. Make sure they got clothes and whatnot. 21, if I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless, when I saw my help in the gate. He never abused anybody. 21. If I have raised my hand against the fatherless, knowing that I had influence in court. That's the gate. That's what that means. I guess they would meet at a gate and kind of have a court. You know, he didn't give a false witness
His official position
to falsely
to
accuse
take advantage
anybody.
of the weak.
Yeah. I would take that as, you know, don't give false witness. He didn't give a false witness. He said, this is crazy now. 22, then let mine arm fall from my shoulder blade, and mine arm be broken from the bone. He's like, let my arm just fall slap off if I've done wrong in any of this. For destruction from God was a terror to me, and by reason of his highness I could not endure. And in essence, he's saying, you know, I'd rather my arm fall or be jerked off than let God deal with me for doing those kind of things. And he's saying, you know, I've been in terror from God doing this. We always blame God. When things go bad, we always blame God. But who is the one that caused all this?
We brought it upon ourselves.
The devil's the one that, you know, God just let the hedge down.
Yeah, a lot of things we bring on ourselves.
Yeah, that's true, for sure. We reap what we sow, for sure. But God, I mean, Job ain't really reaping what he sowed. I mean, it just, you know, it is what it is. If I have made gold my hope. Did I skip one?
You picked up.
Yeah, I picked up at the right spot. What does that mean, if I made gold my hope? You know, rich people have a false sense of security. I don't care how rich you are, it's not going to buy your way into heaven, okay?
Right, for the
Or
love
keep you
of
breathing.
gold.
Or keep you breathing. If it's your time, it's your time. Or have I said to the fine gold, thou art my confidence? You know, you walk around high and mighty and all confident that you can take on the world because you got a fat bank account. And Job,
Good example of that.
Job
I know what pops in my
Job was the richest man around, and just like that,
He lost it all.
it was gone in just a few, I guess in a few hours a day or what. It didn't take long. He says, I've never been that person. I've never let the gold or all this stuff get to
But
me.
all of this are values we're supposed to have as Christians and how we're supposed to try to live. These are all the things that we're supposed to be
Yep, that's why
striving to do.
I picked up on 31. I just want to talk about it. This making a covenant with your eyes goes a long way. It's not just looking at the woman. It's, you know,
It's money, it's things.
it's seeing that person in need that needs a jacket. You know what I mean? He makes a covenant with his eyes. He leads with the woman, and then you say, okay, well, this has all got to do with your eyes. Just remember that. When you see a need, we should be trying to help people. We should see that others are struggling. We should see.
We have a mindset of me and mine.
Yeah.
Then not for no more.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And God will humble you. If you think you're high and mighty, He'll put you down, or He'll let the devil do it. I mean, I don't think God will do it, but He's got a way of chastising His children. And it would be unfair. You know, a child needs, you know, some guidance. If you spoil them, they're going to grow up and they're going to fall on their face. You know what I mean?
We ain't spoiling our children.
It needs to be some real life struggle while they're young, or they ain't going to get it when they get old. So all the stuff that we struggle with in this lifetime is going to be worth it. And it's him straightening us up and getting us to where we need to be. And you know, when we stumble and fall down, He picks us back up. He just don't kick us while we're down. 25. If I rejoice because of my wealth was great, and because my hand had gotten much, he's saying if I rejoice because, you know, he's saying if I rejoice because I was rich and I made it. You know, we got people that say, you know, look what I did. Look how much money I made. Well, you wouldn't be able to do nothing if you wasn't able to wake up and actually do anything that day. And that's, you know, God is the only reason that you're able to do that. If I beheld the sun. Now listen to this, because it kind of gets tricky. If I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in brightness, and my heart had been secretly enticed, or my mouth had kissed my hand, and this is directly talking about. I think it'll say something about it, but he's saying, you know, back then you had these people that worshiped the sun, worshiped the moon, worshiped the stars, worshiped the skies. There were many gods. And what he's saying here, I haven't secretly looked at none of that stuff and made it into a god. I hadn't, you know, gave it any praise that it don't deserve, you know, that it deserved, that, you know, godly praise. I think it explains it. This is verse 28, were an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For I should have denied the God that is above. He's saying I've never, and this is monotheism. It means you worship one God. That's what we are, monotheism. Back in the old days, especially the Romans and stuff like that, they had many gods. You remember Zeus was one of their gods, the god of the thunder or whatever. You know, they had lots of gods. That was before the Romans, couple thousand years before the Romans. So you can imagine how weird the gods get. But there's always been a sun god and a moon god. And you say, I've never worshiped the moon or the sun. I've always worshiped the one and almighty one God. Because it's, you know, punishable by a judge. And when he means that, you know, they'd stone you. And I have not denied the God above. 29, if I rejoiced at the destruction of him that hateth me, or lifted up myself when evil found him. Now, I know ain't nobody ever in here ever said, finally they got what they deserved.
Oh, I'm guilty of that.
Okay, well, you know, Job never did that.
I don't do it anymore.
I don't either,
I
but
used to.
you know, that's
I pray for them I told my husband quit saying that ain't nothing wrong with my legs and I ain't gonna get my disability. I said, you better watch what you say, 'cause God's gonna put it on you. And remember, you.
He said, I never rejoiced at anybody else's destruction that hated me. Do you understand what he's saying? When somebody hated me and something bad happened to them, I never rejoiced about it. I didn't have a party because that's a hard one. That's a hard one to do.
I don't know more. I used to.
I've never lifted up myself when evil found him. Talking about the one that hated him, you know. That's a tough one there. Neither have I suffered my mouth to sin by wishing a curse to his soul. Talking about, have you ever had somebody be ugly or say something ugly to you and you say, man, I wish God would just strike them down?
No.
Or, man, I wish they'd get hit by a car. Yeah, I wish he'd die. Or,
No, because if I do that, then I'm going to get hit by a car.
look, he's saying I've never said with my mouth wishing to curse anybody or that the person that hates him. I'm assuming it's anybody. That's a big one too. 31, if the man of my tabernacle said not, oh what? Oh that we had of his flesh. Let's see what that one says. If those of my household had never said, who has not been filled with Job's meat. Oh, he's never let anybody go hungry in his household. The stranger did not lodge in the street, but I opened my doors to travelers. This was a big thing back then. They used to travel, and it wasn't like it is now. They didn't have hotels and motels and all that stuff. If there was a long enough distance in between the traveling because you had to walk, sometimes there would be an inn, kind of like where Jesus was born. There would be, and what they would do is build a big fire in the middle, and they would keep like the animals and the people, you know, just from freezing to death. There'd be somewhere to just get out of the weather. But once you got to a village or a town, there was no inns. So what happened is when people come through, Job ain't never said, hey, go sleep in the street. He's just let people come in. He said, I've never let anybody sleep in the street. He's let them come into his tabernacle. If you look at tabernacle, it means tent, which means house.
That's hard these days.
Well, especially these days because people are crazy. 33, if I covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding my iniquity in my bosom. He's saying, you know what, I ain't never done anything and tried to hide it. You know, Adam and Eve, you know, after they sinned, they covered themselves with the fig leaves. That was that part of that realizing good and evil from eating from that tree that the devil told them not to. He says, I've never hid mine iniquity. That means anything bad I've ever done, I've never tried to hide it. That's a tough one.
Well, you saying children, like, they learn that early. Like, you know, they don't want to get in trouble or they don't want to get, you know.
Yeah, children. I mean,
whatever can
sometimes
happen.
when a child's young enough, they don't know any better. They got to be taught. But when you're grown, you know better.
Yeah.
You don't hide your iniquity. And I like what Jace always says. He says to live in the light. That's what we're supposed to do. Because when we do things and we try to do it in the dark, well, you don't think God could see it? Because, I mean, he sees everything. So we might as well live in the light. When we mess up, you know, say, hey, we messed up. What do we do when we're living in the dark and then trying to stay in the light? We're being, you know, a hypocrite. You're riding the fence. You live in the light. And that's a good one. Did I fear, this is 34, did I fear a great multitude, or did the contempt of the families terrify me, that I kept silence and went not of the door? Now I'm going to have to read a different translation for that one. Because I so feared the crowd and so dreaded the contempt of the clans, that I kept silent and would not go outside. Oh, that I had someone to hear me. I don't know what that one means.
Is that 34?
Fear the judgment of others.
Is that what it means? You got a study Bible?
No, that's what I feel like it probably.
That probably means that. You need to start teaching class.
Please speak up.
I feared the great multitude, or did the contempt of the families that terrify me. Yeah, that makes sense. You didn't fear the judgment of others?
He wouldn't go out around nobody because he was scared of them judging.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like it. Everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this next one is like, Job has said this so many times. If you'll read all the way up to here, this is what he is begging for. 35, oh, that one would hear me. Behold my desires, is that the Almighty would answer me. And that mine adversary had written a book. He's asking for that mediator again. He's asking for the one that would hear him. And we have that one. But he's asking, he also says that, my adversary had written a book. Huh. What do we got here?
You didn't read this far yet?
Oh, let my accuser put his indictment in writing, is what this translation says. Surely I would hear or wear it on my shoulder. So he's saying, I've never done any of this stuff wrong. I wish my accuser would come up front, write it down, and pin it to my shoulder. Is kind of what what he's saying here. If you've went all this far, and you know who the accuser is, it's Satan. It says in the very beginning, chapter 1, was the accuser. So he's saying, I wish the accuser, whoever's accusing me, and probably the three friends is what he's saying, would write down, or my shortcomings, I wish they would be written down and pinned to me. 36. Surely I would take it upon my shoulder and bind it as a crown to me. I would declare unto him the number of my steps, as a prince would I go near unto him. Talking about the accuser, I guess. If my land cry against me, oh, that the furrows likewise thereof complain. That's talking about his land, his actual land. If he hadn't done what he's supposed to do, let it not do what it's supposed to, not let it make fruit and whatnot. If I have eaten the fruits thereof without money, or have caused the owners thereof to lose their life, let thistles grow instead of wheat, and the cockle instead of barley. That's another translation says stinkweed. I don't know. And it says the words of Job are ended. And what I wanted to point out is what I'm thinking. 37, I would declare unto him the number of my steps, as a prince would I go near unto him. Is he talking about God there?
Yeah.
I would give him an account of mine every step. I would present unto him as to a ruler. I think this is where I was going with this. I think that Job said all this stuff that he's never done wrong. And if you go back a few chapters, he got a long discourse right there. He's saying, I wish that stuff could be written down and I could stand right in front of God and talk to him about it, be judged for it. Whatever, you know, I've been doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I think that's what he's saying. And I could go to God just as he was a ruler. You know what I mean? When you had a problem back then, you would go to the king. And that's a big thing. If you've lived in the light and you've walked upright and you've done all this stuff, and even God said that Job was an upright man. If Job has in his heart that he has lived an upright life to the point that he would stand in front of his maker and like, let's take this thing to court because I do not deserve what I'm getting. That is a bold move. You know what I mean? I do not even want to think about standing in front of the one that made me for the stuff that I've come up short about doing. And that goes back to the, where did it say? That one would hear me. That's talking about he's wanting a person to stand in the gap and let him just talk to God. And we have that. And I think that's wild that we have it now, but that's something that people back then was wanting. Think about that. That's crazy, ain't it?
So Job's just wants somebody to listen to him, hear him out.
He wants to talk to God. That's what he wants to do. If you'll look back at your title headings for this last time, he cries out to God. You know, he's the last chapter, 30. There's a big from verse 20. That whole thing is a cry out to God. And this is where we're going to pick up and talk about Elihu. I wanted to read chapter 31 because 32 ain't going to make no sense if we just pick up at Elihu. Job goes through this big discourse and talks about how righteous he was. And when people start talking about how righteous they are, it gets annoying. And Elihu is fed up with it. And that's where we're going to pick up at.